Using the Rock as their mobile fortress monastery, the Dark Angels have crisscrossed the galaxy, bringing war to the Emperor's enemies. Few other Space Marine chapters can match their roll call of victories, for they have fought in the forefront of many of the most crucial battles in the Imperium's history. For the Dark Angels, however, no action ever is enough to atone for the sins of their ancestors. They remain the Unforgiven until every last fallen angel has been captured, repented, and accepted the Emperor's peace. When the Dark Angels achieve a battlefield objective, they immediately leave to seek their next engagement. They are not a chapter who rebuilds shattered Imperial worlds or performs humanitarian missions. They are the Emperor's warriors, bred solely for battle. After every combat, they reclaim their wounded and fallen comrades and any prisoners they have taken before returning to their orbiting fleet. As a general rule, the secretive Dark Angels do not share battle records with the Administratum. They comply with the letter of Imperial law, which requires that astropathic reports be made to Terra concerning their campaigns, but these communications remain minimal. The Imperium's knowledge of the chapter's plans and actions are vague, on par with only the Space Wolves, who are infamous for the utter disregard they show the bureaucrats of the Adeptus Administratum. The Imperium gleans most of its knowledge about the Dark Angels' activities from outside reports, such as those submitted by those planetary governors and Imperial commanders who fought beside them, or from the Inquisitors sent to inspect them. With their triumphs far too numerous to list in full here in this audio, what follows are those battles that the Dark Angels themselves consider worthy of special commemoration by the chapter. The Dawn of the Imperium, from M30 to M31. The Unification Wars, in circa late 29th till 712 M30. The Dark Angels Legion was the very first of the original 21st founding Space Marine Legions to be created at the end of the Unification Wars, and so was originally under the command of the Emperor himself, when he first began to breed a new type of transhuman warrior using the genome of the missing Primarch Lionel Johnson. Candidates were selected from those Tyranids that had fought beside the Emperor during the Unification Wars when he first revealed himself and his purpose. With the First Legion's aid, the Emperor reconquered Terra, and humanity was on the brink of launching into a golden age, the age of the Imperium. So it was not strange that when the Emperor perfected his techniques for the creation of the Space Marines, many of these Tyranids were chosen to lead the Great Crusade. The Cull of the Thunder Warriors, in circa 669 M30. Extant sources state that as the Wars of Unification came to a close, the Thunder Warriors at last realized that their creator had cursed them with short lifespans as a result of their imperfect genetic augmentations, and turned upon him for what they saw as his betrayal. It was a cadre of several hundred custodians of the elite Legio Custodes, even then believed to have been led by the legendary Constantine Valdor, and accompanied by several thousand prototype Astartes of the First Legion of the newborn Space Marines that stood in the Emperor's defense, carrying out a merciless culling of the obsolete and rebellious Gene soldiers. The Great Crusade, from circa 798 M30 to 5 M31. As the warp storms of the Age of Strife subsided, the Emperor and his newly created Space Marine legions forged outwards from Terra to reconquer the human-settled galaxy. First among the Legion's number were those who would come to be known as the Dark Angels. It is while reclaiming the planets colonized by humanity during the Age of Technology that the Primarch Lionel Johnson, one of the lost gene sons of the Emperor, was discovered on Caliban and was reunited with the Legion made from his gene seed. Under his leadership, the newly renamed Dark Angels served the Emperor's cause with great distinction, claiming more victories than any other Legion, save for the 16th, the Lunar Wolves, under the command of L. Johnson's brother, Horus. The discovery of Primarch L. Johnson in 846 M30. The Emperor of Mankind came to the death world of Caliban and reunited with his lost gene son, Lionel Johnson, a young, newly inducted Calibanite, 1st Legion librarian, Zahariel El-Zurias, narrowly averted an attempted assassination on the Emperor's life. After being given command of the 1st Legion, the Lion reforged it into his own image and dubbed them the Dark Angels, named after an allegorical figure of Calibanite myth. The Compliance of Molech in 869 M30. This was one of the Dark Angels Legion's earliest recorded campaigns under the command of their newly appointed Primarch, Lionel Johnson. The newly discovered Night World of Molech was brought into Imperial compliance through a massive joint compliance operation between multiple Legiones Astartes, including the Dark Angels, Lunar Wolves, Emperor's Children, White Scars, and thousands of Imperialis Auxilia soldiers, and various Mechanicum and Legio Titanicus assets. Cyprian Devine of House Devine was named planetary governor of Molech. In the presence of several of his Primarch sons, the Emperor led them to a warp portal, where he proceeded to enter into the realm of chaos to parley with the ruiner's powers. When he returned, the Emperor appeared aged, but much more powerful. He then suppressed his son's memories of Molech and stationed a large garrison force comprised of nearly 100 Imperialis Auxilia regiments, 3 Legio Titanicus cohorts, along with detachments from 2 Space Marine legions to protect the secrets of the war portal on Molech. The Rangdan Xenocides, from circa 839 to 890 M30. The Titans of the Legio Griffonicus, as well as the Legio Vulturum, the Legio Kidianos, and other Xanthide Mechanicum forces of Xana II, served alongside the vaunted Dark Angels Legion during the vital campaign known as the Rangdan Xenocides. The Dark Angels hurled themselves at these terrible Xenos enemies and broke their greatest strength in countless battles against the vile aliens on the edge of the Halo stars. This campaign culminated in the 3rd Rangdan Xenocide around 890 M30, which resulted in the loss of the lives of 50,000 Space Marines spent in preventing the destruction of perhaps the entire Northern Imperium by the menace from the outer darkness. Due to these extensive losses suffered by the 1st Legion, by 899 M30, the Ultramarines Legion was on the cusp of becoming the largest Space Marine Legion, standing at around 166,000 legionaries. The Assault on Delan in 870 M30. As the Space Marine Legions pushed back the frontiers of the nascent Imperium during the Great Crusade, each Primarch strove to excel in the eyes of the Emperor, and none more so than Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves. Only Horus and Lionel Johnson could claim more victories than Russ, and this was a constant frustration for the Wolf King. It was on the world of Delan where the Space Wolves were fighting alongside the Dark Angels, that matters came to a head. The Tyrant of Duran, Durath, had personally insulted the Emperor, sacrificing thousands of Imperial officials to his patron demon. Both Ross and L. Johnson desired the honor of slaying this heretic. The Tyrant Durath insulted Ross, causing him to demand the right to lead the attack on the fortress. L. Johnson ignored him and led his own carefully planned attack instead, killing the tyrant personally. After the battle, Ross confronted and attacked him for this insult to his honor, and the two dueled for a solar day and a night. Ross eventually stopped attacking, seeing the humor of the situation, at which point L. Johnson knocked him unconscious in his wrath. Only then did the Lion consider honor to be satisfied. The prostrate Ross was carried from the fortress by his warriors, and when he regained consciousness, the Dark Angels had already departed to fight in the Alisor campaign. Ross swore he would avenge the stain on his honor. To this day, whenever the Space Wolves and Dark Angels meet, one of their number is called upon to refight the duel of the Primarchs in order that honor may be satisfied. The discovery of Laskel in circa 900 M30. This terrestrial world was discovered on the edge of the Grail Abyss by the 7th Expeditionary Fleet under Lord Commander Suleiman Grimm of the 1st Legion. Originally, it had been a feral orc holding before the Dark Angels exterminated the orc infestation. Laskel became a forward outpost of the Great Crusade, and later a naval fleet anchorage for the Armada Imperialis was constructed there in orbit under the auspices of the Lucian Mechanicum. Continuing to grow, by 902 M30, Laskel had become an independent and self-sustaining imperial colony. The subjugation of Sarosh in circa 945 M30. Next, the Dark Angels' 4th Expeditionary Fleet reported to take part in the enforcement of the continued imperial compliance of the planet Sarosh, officially codified as Sigma 517, an effort which had formerly been commanded by an officer of the White Scars Legion. The Saroshi, ruled by a bureaucracy, had recently expressed their interest in becoming part of the Imperium, and the Imperials were eager to allow them in, believing that these people seemed to express the same secular beliefs as they did in the Imperial truth. But the Saroshi, without mentioning it to the Imperial expedition, of course, secretly worshipped chaotic entities in the warp they called the Mekalim, and saw the anti-religious stance of the pre-heresy Imperium's Imperial truth as unsuppressed evil. The Lord High Exactor, the leader of the Saroshi bureaucracy, denounced L. Johnson and the Emperor to the Primarch's face aboard the Dark Angel's flagship, and the Lion responded by ramming his power sword through the fanatical Saroshi leader's body. Unknown to the Dark Angels, the Saroshi had secreted a nuclear device aboard their shuttle, intending to assassinate the fleet's entire command structure, including L. Johnson. However, Luther and a junior librarian named Zahariel managed to eject the shuttle into space, causing only minor damage to the Dark Angel's flagship. After this incident, Luther, Zahariel, and 500 other Dark Angels were sent back to Caliban in disgrace for allowing an enemy to get a nuclear device aboard the Primarch's flagship. Their official task was to oversee the recruitment of new Space Marines into the Legion from the Calibanite population. The compliance of Byzanthus from circa the mid-900s M30. A Dark Angel's expeditionary fleet under the command of Chapter Master Maria Estellan discovered the far-flung human-settled world of Byzanthis during their exploration of System DX-619. A Vox signature, feigned or perhaps even non-existent, had brought the Dark Angels here, the merest chattering murmur against the background radiation of the universe. Another Dark Angels fleet under the command of Chapter Master Belath had joined Estellan's only 2 solar weeks earlier in the Calcabrina system, on orders from Lionel Johnson that Belath add his forces to the expedition. Estellan had never met him before, but this was not surprising. The massive influx of warriors into the First Legion following the rediscovery of Caliban meant that there were many Dark Angel commanders who had never met each other, tossed together on task forces and in war zones all across the galaxy. That one such chapter commander had been dispatched to assist Estellan was curious for the simple fact that there had been little enough for Estellan's chapter to do, and additional forces were unlikely to change that. When the 2 chapter masters finally met face to face, they differed in their approach of what action should be taken against the newly discovered world. Estellan advocated making a peaceful overture to the planet's locals in order to foster good relations. Belath advocated a more aggressive approach to subdue the planet through force of arms. Estellan cautioned Belath that they should only use force when all other forms of diplomacy had failed. The younger chapter master did not agree with the senior commander's assessment, but deferred to his position. Upon first contact with the local populace, Estellan's landing force was engaged by the local military, which sustained substantial losses while the Dark Angels took only minimal casualties. Receiving a looped message from Byzanthis' ruling global council, the Committee of Nations, Estellan hoped to make amends for the inadvertent conflict. He asked the committee's constituent national governments to treat with the Imperials through the Committee of Nations, and hopefully forge a common fate for the whole planet. The younger Belath refused to consent to this course of action. Estellan and one of his commanders agreed to meet the Committee of Nations in their chambers and explain their purpose. Estellan explained to the committee's representative the benefits of becoming a part of the newly forged Imperium of Man, under the beneficent rule of the Emperor of Mankind. But these negotiations were interrupted by the unheralded arrival of Chapter Master Belath. 10 massive armored Terminators suddenly teleported into the committee chambers and opened fire on the startled delegates, massacring a good portion of their number. Belath then inquired of Estellan whether he should order the rest of his fleet to attack or whether they should teleport back to orbit. Estellan was filled with a mixture of rage and incredulity. His hand forced by Belath's insubordination, Estellan reluctantly ordered the assault. He warned his younger counterpart that the blood of all who died on Byzanthis in the coming war would be on his hands, and that he would not let his actions go unpunished. The younger chapter master merely dismissed his senior commander's threats and proceeded to inform Estellan that he had already sent word to Caliban of what occurred on Byzanthis and that he would soon learn the consequences of disobedience. The Siege of Barakan. In the 1900s M30. This was an Imperial compliance campaign carried out by the Dark Angels during the Great Crusade against the Orcs on the world of Barakan. A notable battle of this campaign was the defense of Firebase Angiago. A chapter of the Dark Angels was cut off by the Greenskins and trapped at the Firebase for 18 solar months. By the end, the beleaguered Astartes were fighting off the alien assaults with fists and pieces of sharpened steel scavenged from bombed-out strongpoints. But through it all, Brother Nemiel never wavered. He taunted the greenskins relentlessly and exhorted his brothers to acts of ever greater defiance in the face of insurmountable odds. When a greenskin's crude axe shattered his knee, he grabbed the beast by one of its tusks and kicked it to death just for spite. When the last line of defense was broken, Nemiel stood his ground in the face of a massive Xenos champion and fought an epic duel that had given the chapter time to launch a counterattack that finally exhausted the last of the enemy's strength. The next day, when relief forces finally managed to fight their way through the firebase, Nemiel stood on the ramparts and cheered with the rest of his brothers. It took several solar minutes before he registered the slaps on his shoulders and back and realized that the chapter was not cheering for victory, they were cheering for him. Not long after, Nemiel's chapter voted unanimously for him to take the place of Brother Redemptor, Barthiel, who had fallen during the darkest hours of the siege. The suppression of the Gordian League. From circa 998 M30 to 5 M31. This was an Imperial compliance action carried out by the Dark Angels during the 200th year of the Great Crusade against the Shield World of the Gordian League, a confederation of human worlds who were allied with degenerate Xenos. During this campaign, the Dark Angels' High Command received word that Warmaster Horus and his Sons of Horus Legion had renounced their oaths of allegiance to the Emperor, along with Primarch Angron's World Eaters, Mortarian's Death Guard, and Fulgrim's Emperor's Children. They also received word of the atrocity committed against the doomed world of Istvan III, when Horus ordered it to be virus-bombed, which rendered it a lifeless dead world. The Warmaster knew that the Emperor would respond with all the force he had available. L. Johnson believed the Dark Angels' deployment to the Shield Worlds was part of an effort to scatter the Imperium's most loyal servants as far as possible in order to minimize the number of loyalist Space Marine legions Horus would have to face at any given time. Even so, a strike force of 7 full legions posed a dire threat to Horus' survival as they made their way to meet the traitors at Istvan V. L. Johnson's forces were too deeply enmeshed in the Shield Worlds to respond quickly to Horus' treachery. The best estimates of the Primarch staff indicated that it would take them nearly 8 solar months to conclude their offensive operations, even on an emergency basis, and reposition themselves for a strike against Istvan V. Even if they could move more quickly, Horus' agents would be able to alert the Warmaster in time to organize a counter-strike. However, L. Johnson believed that a small, hand-picked force might accomplish what an entire legion could not. He issued orders for many of the Dark Angels' reserve squadrons to resupply and prepare for immediate deployment to the Tanagra system. Their primary target was to secure the Forge World of Diamat. They could not afford to let the Warmaster acquire the substantial supplies and ordnance needed to fortify the world of Istvan V against the approaching Loyalist strike force. L. Johnson personally commanded the expedition to Diamat, with a battle group comprising 15 warships. Secrecy was vital, as the Primarch was aware that the Warmaster's agents were more than likely tracking his movements. The Horus Heresy, from 5 to 14 M31. Knowing the Dark Angels and their Primarch would remain stubbornly loyal to the Emperor, the Warmaster Horus ordered them to the eastern fringe on the far side of the galaxy. Hampered by distance, ambushes set up by the traitorous Night Lords and demonic attacks, the Dark Angels could not ultimately reach Terra in time to participate in the defense of the Imperial Palace, the culminating battle of the Great Galactic Civil War. The Battle of Diamat in 5M31. When word reached the Dark Angels of the Istvan III atrocity, Lionel Johnson and the 1st Legion were bogged down fighting a campaign against the Gordian League. Therefore, the Lion led a small war fleet of 16 vessels against the Forge World of Diamat in order to seize Ordinati heavy siege engines and deny them to the traitors. He encountered some resistance from vessels loyal to the traitor cause, as well as traitor Imperial Army forces and the Sons of Horror's company on the planet's surface. The Lion ordered the destruction of the planet's primary forges, which annihilated the traitor forces in a great conflagration and denied Horus Diamat's crucial manufacturing capabilities. In the battle's aftermath, the Lion encountered the Iron Warriors fleet, led by Perturabo, who were on their way to Istvan V to pacify the treacherous Warmaster. Unaware of their true loyalties, the Lion unwittingly handed over the captured Ordinati to be used against Horus. The Thramas Crusade. From circa 7 to 9 M31. During the Horus Heresy, the Warmaster Horus sent Conrad Kurz and his Night Lord's Legion on a campaign of intentional genocide against the Imperial strongholds of Heroldar and Thramas in the Aegis sub-sector of the Eastern Fringes, thus protecting Horus's flank and delaying the Dark Angel's Legion from reinforcing the Loyalists blocking the traitors' path to Terra. This bitterly contested campaign dragged on for nearly 3 standard years. In an attempt to sway his brother Lionel Johnson to Horus's cause, the Night Haunter left a deep void beacon in the patrol path of one of the Dark Angel's Outrider vessels. The beacon was set to transmit coordinates in advance, so that the two Primarchs could meet and parley on the planet of Tsagawalsa. Night Haunter wanted to break his former brother either mentally, physically, or both to obtain his objectives. The Primarchs were accompanied by 2 warriors from their personal honor guards to the parley. The meeting began amicably enough between the two as they conversed with relative civility. This amity lasted only until the Night Haunter slandered L. Johnson, and in return, the Lion struck his former brother. This melee further degenerated into an all-out brawl between the two sides. As the Night Haunter strangled the life out of L. Johnson, one of the Dark Angel's honor guardsmen ran his sword through the Night Haunter's back, saving his Primarch's life. Eventually, both legions sent reinforcement in response to this incident. Each side dragged away their respective Primarchs from the scene of the combat. Both survived this brutal confrontation and went on to continue the contest between their legions for control of the Aegis sub-sector. The Battle of Perditus in 8M31. When the Dark Angels received intelligence from an astropathic message from the nearby Perditus system, they acted accordingly and moved to intercept. Upon arrival, they interrupted the solar month-long conflict between the Iron Hands 98th Clan Company, led by Cassalier Loramek, and the large Death Guard contingent, led by First Captain Callus Typhon. Both sides had been fighting over an ancient self-aware technological device known as the T'Challa engine. This device was a part of a triumvirate of similar sentient devices, another being the Ouroboros, and the third, unnamed one, which, when combined, could create temporal rifts that bridge space and time. On its own, the T'Challa was capable of precise and extremely efficient warp jumps. Faced with the prospect of fighting the entirety of the much larger 1st Legion fleet, both sides retreated from the planet Perditus' surface at the Lion's request. Wary of both sides' motives, especially First Captain Typhon's, the Lion prevented the device from falling into the Death God's hands for his own nefarious ends. The Lion then proceeded to serve his own ambitions and requisitioned the device for his own use. The Lion ordered the destruction of Perditus, much to the consternation of both commanders. The Dark Angel's Primarch used the Tuchalcha engine to make a warp jump, but during their sojourn through the Materium, the First Legion was beset by demons. The Lion reinstituted his legion's librarians to fight these nefarious warp-spawned entities. As this was in direct violation of the Emperor's decree absolute abolishing the librarian corps of the Legiones Astartes made at the Council of Nicaea, this caused a dispute within the Legion that eventually came to a head when the enraged Lion slew Chaplain Nemiel, who had opposed the use of the librarians. At the height of the battle, he encountered the greater demon of Tzeentch known as Kairos Fate Weaver. The demon attempted to convert the Primarch to the cause of the ruinous powers, but failed miserably, as he offered nothing to sway the Lion to their cause. The Lion told the foul creature that absolute loyalty to the Emperor was reward enough, and impaled the twin-headed Lord of Change through its black heart, asking whether the demon had foreseen his actions. The defense of Nagathar in circa 9M31. Severed from the main body of their legion by the unleashing of the Ruin Storm, a strike force from the Dark Angel's Legion found shelter in the Nagathar system, which had become a safe haven for several loyalist splinter forces, the most important being drawn from the Imperial Fists. The many loyalist fractions banded together to defend Nagathar from a powerful incursion led by the Word-Bearers, who had hoped to prey on the system's millions of inhabitants to fuel yet another of their sorcerous rites. The Xana Incursion in 9M31. Intelligence reached Terra that the renegade Mechanicum Forge world of Xana II on the western fringe of the Imperium had reached an accord with the traitor forces to supply the War Master Horus's armies with its vast output of arms and material. The bargain was sealed with the delivery by Xana II of a number of newly created Ordinatus grade weapons undergoing their final field tests. In what was effectively a suicide mission, a hand-picked force of Legiones Astartes, including many Black Shields, in this case Space Marines who had chosen to remain loyal despite their parent legion's treachery, was dispatched under great secrecy to destroy the war machines and drive a wedge between Xana II and the traitors. With the help of the Dark Angel strike cruiser Dark Sovereign and its legionaries, the Loyalists were able to secure 2 powerful Ordinati and destroyed a third, temporarily delaying the alliance between Xana II and the traitors for a number of standard years. Hunting the Night Haunter in 9M31. Utilizing the sentient Tuchalcha engine a second time to make a rapid and far-reaching warp jump, the Dark Angels were able to execute a meticulously planned ambush on the Night Lord's fleet while it was in transit across the sub-sector that saw the back of the Night Lord's Legion broken and their Primarch mortally wounded after having faced his brother L. Johnson once again in mortal combat. Thanks to the skilled coordination and superb execution by the Lion, the Night Lord's fleet was devastated, losing dozens of capital ships and approximately 1/4 of their Legion fleet to the Angel's assault. Unfortunately, the remainder of the Night Lord's fleet fled the Dark Angel's wrath, taking their critically wounded Primarch with them before the Lion could finally end his wretched life. Directing a second ambush on the regrouping Night Lords, Konrad Curze reawakened from his medically induced coma and boarded the Invincible Reason with several of his most elite warriors, including 1st Captain Jago Savatarion and his elite Atramentar Terminators. The ensuing battle ended when Curze fled to the lower decks of the massive Dark Angel's flagship, and the few surviving Night Lords, including Savatarion, were taken prisoner. The Night Haunter, however, remained on the loose within the bowels of the mighty vessel, and continued to wreak terror and chaos amongst the mortal crew. He also killed every hunter-killer team sent by the Lion to hunt him down. After losing several squads of Dark Angels, the Lion himself took up the hunt for Curze, stalking him throughout the Invincible Reason for the next 16 solar weeks. However, he could not find his elusive brother Primarch. The arrival at Ultramar and the establishment of the Imperium Secundus. In 9M31. With the torrential ruin storm summoned into existence by the Word-Bearers at the Battle of Kalth raging across the galaxy, blocking out the light of the Astronomicon and causing warp travel to be all but impossible, the Imperium was effectively cut in half. The Dark Angels came to the realization that they were unable to return to Terra to assist in its defense, even with the aid of the Tuchalcha engine. Miraculously, they locked onto the beacon of the strange alien device known as the Pharos on the world of Sothar, which guided the First Legion's fleet safely through the warp to the realm of Ultramar's capital world of Makridge. There, they were greeted by Robert Guilliman and Sanguinius, whose Blood Angels Legion was also guided to the realm of Ultramar by the Pharos. The 3 Primarchs were instrumental in the foundation of the Imperium Secundus, as a means of continuing the fight against the traitors and securing the Emperor's great work. Guilliman proclaimed Sanguinius as the rightful heir to the Emperor, and declared him the new ruler of Imperium Secundus. Lionel Johnson was made Lord Protector of this new empire of humanity and commander over all its military forces, a title that was similar to that of War Master which he had once so craved. Unfortunately, the foundation of Imperium Secundus was marred, and Konrad Curze escaped from the Invincible Reason and rampaged across Makridge, intent on spreading as much terror and chaos as he could. Eventually, both Guilliman and the Lion confronted him. Their attempts to kill him were unsuccessful, as the Night Lord's Primarch had laid a cunning trap. He brought down an entire chapel upon the 2 Primarchs through the use of planted explosives and fled the scene. Guilliman and the Lion were only saved through the direct intervention of the loyalist Iron Warrior's warsmith Barabas Dantioch, who was communicating with Guilliman at the time of the attack through a portal that was opened by the Pharos. On instinct, the warsmith reached through the portal and pulled the 2 Primarchs to safety on Sothar. The Battle of Zapath in 11M31. Feeling directly responsible for the Night Haunter's rampage on Makridge, the Lion continued to obsessively hunt his wayward former brother for the next 2 standard years. In 11M31, he eventually was able to trace a slim lead on Curze's whereabouts to the Zapath system, which had since fallen to the forces of the Word-Bearers and World Eaters during their Shadow Crusade campaign. Fareth Redloss, the voted lieutenant of the Dark Angels Dreadwing, was charged with leading the hunt for Konrad Curze upon the world of Zapath. The Dark Angels quickly uncovered the horrors perpetrated by the Word-Bearers to power their dark rituals. Eventually, the Dark Angels took part in multiple engagements against the forces of both traitor legions, which culminated in Zapath's capital city of Numentis. The traitor forces were utterly annihilated by the victorious Dark Angels, and the world was left in the care of its surviving population. The Exile of the Lion, circa 11 M31. While continuing his obsessive hunt for the elusive Night Haunter, Lionel Johnson and Robert Gilliman continuously clashed over policies, especially in regards to the security of the Imperium Secundus, and how best to deal with the emergence of rebels on Macridge that the Lion was certain Conrad Kurz had something to do with. Following the suicide bombing of an Astartes convoy, the Lion used the 1st Legion to establish martial law on Macridge. Certain that Kurz was hiding within the rebellious Illyrium region of the planet, the Lion advocated the use of a massive orbital saturation bombardment of the area to ensure Kurz's death. Facing resistance from both Emperor Sanguinius and Gilliman, the Lion instead opted to deploy his legion's Dreadwing in order to flush out Kurz and the rebels. During an attack on the city of Alma Mons, the Lion finally cornered the elusive Night Lord's Primarch, and the two came to blows. After a brutal confrontation, the Lion eventually emerged victorious, and questioned his brother why he had turned away from the Emperor, to which Kurz simply replied, "Why not?" Kurz went on to explain that there was a monster in his head that he could not stop. Though he finally had him at his mercy, the Lion couldn't bring himself to kill his brother, and instead pummeled him again. The Lion ripped his backpack from his battle plate and then lifted him over his head, brutally bringing him down across his knee, breaking Kurz's spine, paralyzing him. The Lion brought the grievously wounded Kurz before Sanguinius and Gilliman to stand trial. A triumvirate was held where Kurz defended his actions, but refused to admit his guilt. Since each of the Primarchs had been created to perform a specific function, he claimed that he was merely acting according to his own nature, and therefore had committed no crimes. The Night Lord's Primarch further divided Gilliman and the Lion by accusing the latter of secretly ordering the orbital bombardment Illyrium in direct violation of Gilliman's orders. Enraged, the Lion sought to kill Kurz, but was halted by the words of Sanguinius and Gilliman, who snatched L. Johnson's Lion Sword and broke the blade across his armored thigh. L. Johnson was furious, but Sanguinius dismissed the Lord Protector of the Imperium, ending the triumvirate. The Lion was subsequently banished from the Imperium by Sanguinius and Gilliman. Taking their leave, the Dark Angels withdrew from Macridge only solar hours later. Standing in the chamber of the Tuchalcha engine, the Lion brooded over recent events as he questioned his actions over the course of the last few solar decades. The banishment of Luther, the death of Nemiel, as well as other decisions he had come to regret. As the Dark Angels made their final preparations to depart back to Caliban, the Lion ordered the Tuchalcha engine to teleport himself and Holgin, Deathbringer, the voted lieutenant of the Deathwing, back to Macridge. As Sanguinius prepared to execute Kurz for his crimes, both the Lion and his lieutenant teleported directly into the chamber and told Sanguinius to stop. As troops entered the room, demanding that the Lion surrender, L. Johnson explained his reasons for the intrusion. He reasoned that Kurz had the ability to see precognitive visions of potential futures, and repeated the Night Haunter's claim that his death would one day come at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor. If this was true, the Lion reasoned then it was proof that the Emperor was still alive. Sanguinius knew the Lion's explanation rang true, as he recognized that his own precognitive visions of his inevitable death would also eventually come to pass. When Gilliman demanded to know what would become of Kurz, Lion knelt before his two brothers and promised that he would be Kurz's jailer. Passage of the Angels, from 11 to 13 M31. The campaign of vengeance against the traitor legion's home planets during the Horus Heresy, that was later remembered as the Passage of the Angels, also known as the Crusade of Vengeance, was a brutal loyalist counter-offensive spearheaded by the Dark Angels Legion and led by Lionel Johnson. They wreaked havoc across the southern Imperium in a campaign of revenge and extermination. The campaign was designed to both punish the traitorous forces of the Warmaster Horus and destroy their military assets in the region. This systematic annihilation of resource-rich worlds deprived the Warmaster and his forces of precious material he needed to maintain a lengthy siege of the Imperium's throne world of Terra. By taking such drastic measures, the Lions sought to prevent the Warmaster from establishing a second front against Terra. The Lion authorized the usage of forbidden weaponry from the Age of Strife held in the Dark Angels Legion's armory, which resulted in a trail of burning and scorched worlds that were loyal to Horus left in the Loyalists' wake. The Second Battle of Davin in 11M31. The world of Davin, where Horus first fell to the temptations of chaos, was destroyed in the first act of the Dark Angels' judgment upon the traitors. After the destruction of Davin, the ruin storm began to dissipate, allowing the Dark Angels to embark on a crusade of extermination against traitor worlds across the vast reaches of the Imperium's southern segmente. At the Lion's direct command, long-forbidden weapons from the earliest days of the Great Crusade, dating back to the Age of Strife, were loosed upon those who turned from the Emperor, burning whole worlds from existence. The Angels' crusade of extermination was designed to both punish the traitors and destroy their military assets. The Death of Chemos in 12M31. Chemos, the home world of the Emperor's Children Legion, came under direct attack by the Dark Angels during the Passage of the Angels campaign. The Angels' armada smashed through the Emperor's Children's system defense fleet, leaving behind them only the smoldering wrecks of venerable 3rd Legion warships and frozen corpses floating in the darkness of the void. The invasion that followed saw the Dreadwing deployed to the surface of Chemos en masse to engage the Emperor's Children garrison and plant seismic devices of immense potency in key locations on the planet. The Emperor's Children, though vastly outnumbered, fought fiercely in defense of their homeworld and inflicted heavy casualties upon the invaders. But ultimately, it proved a futile effort. The Dreadwing was merciless in the prosecution of attacks on strategic targets and scoured enemy strongholds of all life using weapons born of humanity's darkest nightmares. With their objectives completed, the Dark Angels returned to their fleet in orbit and remotely detonated the seismic macro charges. A chain of catastrophic explosions racked Chemos and split its tectonic plates apart, creating kilometers-deep canyons that swallow the dying planet's glittering metropolises into their cavernous depths. At the height of this cataclysm, the Dark Angels' fleet initiated the orbital bombardment, launching a spread of cyclonic torpedoes at predetermined weak spots across the world's surface, each strike piercing the weakened crust and detonating within Chemos' planetary core. The once proud homeworld of the Emperor's Children broke apart, sending colossal slabs of planetary debris tumbling through space. The Chemos system was declared perdita, and warning beacons promising swift retribution upon any trespassers were placed around the system's boundaries before the Dark Angels departed to continue their crusade of vengeance. The liberation of Saronican in 12M31. An expeditionary force composed of elements of the Ultramarines and the Calth High Guard Solar Auxilia regiments of the Imperial Army under Ultramarines' command was dispatched by Lionel Johnson to pacify the hive worlds of the Saronican Gulf. The Ultramarines and their support troops engaged with rebellious Imperial Army regiments and rogue fleets of the World Eaters Legion in a prolonged campaign across 3 star systems. Eventually, the Sons of Guilliman emerged from this conflict bloodied but victorious. However, their victory came at the cost of their expeditionary force being left behind by the Dark Angels, who moved on to the next stages of their relentless campaign of extermination against the traitors' worlds, free from the scrutiny and increasing unease of the Ultramarines and their tactics. The fall of Luth Tyr in 12M31. The Dark Angels' fleet reached Luth Tyr, a key mustering world for the traitors, located upon one of the most stable warp routes in the southern Imperium. Lionel Johnson could ill afford the obliteration of such a valuable prize, and ordered his Knight Praetors to deploy their orders and capture the world in the name of Terra. The Dark Angels made planetfall in the wake of an orbital bombardment so intense that it fused the planet's rolling white desert into plains of jagged glass and set the upper layers of the atmosphere ablaze. Luth Tyr's Iron Warriors garrison and their Death Guard allies mounted a valiant resistance against overwhelming enemy numbers. But one by one their strongholds were blasted to rubble and utterly destroyed by the Dark Angels. Isolated Iron Warriors' forces mounted desperate last stands among the ruins of shattered fortresses and broken refineries across the world, with the death toll continuing to rise for the invading loyalists. During the fighting, a combined Death Guard, Iron Warriors, and Dark Mechanicum force mounted a daring attempt to reach Luth Tyr's tertiary spaceport at the planet's south pole. They fought their way through massed loyalist forces and packs of raging ambols in a desperate bid to reach the spaceport's warp-capable craft, which they used to escape into the void, leaving Luth Tyr firmly under Imperial control. The Siege of Inwit in 13M31. Hungry for the strategic prize that Rogal Dorn's homeworld represented in the industrial wealth of its surrounding stellar pocket empire, a vast traitor fleet led by elements of the Emperor's children and roving forces allied to the Warmaster Horus attacked the worlds of the Inwit cluster. Each piecemeal assault was repelled by the garrison of Imperial Fists and loyalist Solar Auxilia forces stationed in the system, who in turn were forced to fall back from their forward positions in clashes of growing intensity. Eventually, the loyalists retreated to Inwit itself, where they were besieged by the numerically superior traitor fleets. The Imperial Fists lost dozens of warships in desperate attempts to break the blockade and seek reinforcements. However, the frigate Astral Majesty managed to break through to a Mandeville point and successfully translate into the warp. The heavily damaged warship of the Imperial Fists was forced to exit the warp near the system of Amaranthine in the galactic south, where, by chance alone, it encountered a scout element of the Dark Angels fleet. The surviving Imperial Fists were taken before Lionel Johnson to request the assistance of the Dark Angels in lifting the siege of Inwit, but they were denied. The Sons of Dawn were instead conscripted by the Lord of the First Legion to be part of his crusade of vengeance. They reluctantly joined their forces with those of the Angels and aided them in the prosecution of their campaign, leaving behind the people of Inwit to face their enemies alone and without aid. The Thassos Incident in 13M31. A Dark Angels flotilla was sent to investigate rumors of an unidentified fleet lurking in the isolated Thassos system in the Segmentum Tempestus. The Dark Angels were ambushed by a reaving warband of the Night Lords as they arrived in the system and suffered severe losses. The Night Lords were denied the killing blow when an irregular fleet of warships bearing the sigils of the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard emerged from the asteroid field around the world of Thassos Secundus and intervened. Caught between the surviving Dark Angels vessels and the newly arrived Shattered Legion's force, the Night Lords hurriedly withdrew from the Thassos system, abandoning the smoldering wrecks of several warships of their legion. Thirsting for a chance to avenge the terrible losses they suffered on the killing fields of Istvan V, the Shattered Legion's force was offered fresh supplies of arms and munitions and was subsequently tasked by Lionel Johnson with scouring the nearby systems of remaining traitor forces. Deliverance Conjunction 13M31. The vast fleet of the Dark Angels reached the moon of Deliverance in the Kiava system. There, in the fortress of the Raven Guard, Lionel Johnson met with his brother Primarchs Corvus Corax and Leman Russ. The Lion was quick to question Corax's absence from all the major fronts of the war since Istvan V, but his ire was put to rest by Leman Russ, who pointed at the survival of his own legion as proof of the Raven Lord's continuous loyalty to the Emperor. Fully recovered from the wounds he suffered in the Trizolian system, Leman Russ declared that he and all Space Wolves warriors on Deliverance would join the Dark Angels in their crusade of obliteration. To appease the Lion's call to arms, and knowing well the fate that befell those who did not demonstrate loyalty as the first Primarch expected it, Corax offered vast quantities of munitions and supplies from the forge fanes of Kiava to the Dark Angels and Space Wolves, including thousands of newly created suits of Mark VI Corvus power armor. Hesitant to commit any significant portion of his depleted legion to what he saw as an undertaking of excessive violence and needless waste, Corax assigned only a small expeditionary force of his Raven Guard to accompany the Dark Angels in the next stages of their campaign. Few in number, but bearing the experience of 1,000 battlefields between them, the Raven Guard departed Deliverance with orders to eliminate key enemy targets ahead of the Lion's onslaught in order to save entire worlds from complete annihilation. The Ghosts of Zhao Arcad in 13M31. Ambitious to carry the momentum of their Primarch's campaign forwards, an impetuous contingent of the Dark Angels reached the Forge World of Zhao Arcad in the galactic southwest and proceeded to make planetfall at its principal forge fanes. The Dark Angels exited their drop pods and orbital assault transports to encounter warriors clad in the crimson armor of the Thousand Suns, previously thought to have been destroyed at the hands of Leman Russ and his Space Wolves Legion during the burning of Prospero. Emerging from the psi mists obscuring the forge fanes, the Thousand Suns did not open fire on the Dark Angels. Instead, they proclaimed their loyalty to the Emperor and offered to parley. Under orders from the Lion himself to subjugate the traitor Forge World and believing the Prosperine warlocks to be lying, the Dark Angels initiated offensive operations across their landing sites on Zhao Arcad. Determined not to allow Zhao Arcad to suffer the same fate as their devastated homeworld Prospero, the Thousand Sons unleashed their psychic might and the seemingly endless tide of battle automata against the invaders, inflicting severe losses on the Dark Angels. The First Legion forces launched 3 successive counter-assaults in order to push the enemy out of the ever-shrinking landing sites established by the Angels, but each failed to achieve its goals. Hundreds of loyalist lives were lost when Titans from the Legio Xetobiax intervened to put an end to the ill-fated invasion. The remaining Dark Angels hastily withdrew to their fleet and enforced an orbital blockade of Zhao Arcad, awaiting further orders from the Lion. The Siege of Barbarus begins. In 13M31, a vast loyalist armada broke from the warp into the Barbarus system, spearheaded by Lionel Johnson's Gloriana-class battleship, the Invincible Reason. Alongside the fleets of the Dark Angels sailed the warships of the Raven Guard and the Space Wolves, led by their Primarch Leman Russ. The Loyalist Armada smashed through the scant few remaining Death Guard warships that stood in defense of their homeworld to obliterate the inner system defense platforms and orbital stations and, at last, reach Barbarus's orbit. Swarms of Death Guard Stormbirds and Thunderhawks rose from the planet's surface to mount futile attack runs in a desperate bid to give their brothers on the ground time to prepare for the coming invasion. But they were swiftly shot down by massed formations of interceptor craft launched from the bays of Raven Guard cruisers. Sheltering behind the multiple layers of void-shielded defenses, the Death Guard and their allies looked up as the pale sun of Barbarus was eclipsed by scores of falling drop pods and swarms of orbital landing craft that brought the wrath of 2 Primarchs and warriors from 3 loyalist Space Marine legions. Reaping what was sown in 13M31. The crusade of vengeance against the traitor legion's home planets that would come to be known as the Passage of the Angels came to the adoptive home of Mortarion and the Death Guard. The defenders of Barbarus had no illusions as to the certainty of their fate. The forces arrayed against them were the rival of any expeditionary fleet of the Great Crusade. Yet their own strength was no trivial thing. A garrison of grim Death Guard, shattered but unbroken force of iron warriors and an ambassadors of Horus's own Sons of Horus Legion stood their ground against the fury of the Lion, the Wolf King, and the Raven Lord. Such a confrontation could only end in extermination, but the toll upon the Loyalists was great. This was the homeworld of the Reaper and his grim 14th Legion, and they would not sell it cheaply. The Primarchs of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves had made planetfall, and if the traitor forces were to lose Barbarus, then perhaps cutting the head from one of those legions would balance the scales. While the forces of the Lion and the Wolf King arrayed themselves upon the plains of Orthria, full of rage and vengeance, the Raven Guard made ready their aircraft and jump troops. The Gene Sons of Corvus Corax had neither the numbers of their allied legions nor their thirst for blood. Their goal was not to make an example of the traitor legions, but to end the conflict swiftly and decisively. Amid the toxic smoke of the crash site, the forces of the Loyalist attackers surged towards the massed lines of the traitor sortie. A broad line of Loyalist armor and Dreadnoughts pounded the defensive emplacements with lass, bolt, and missile fire, and from within the armored hull of his Land Raider Spartan, Leman Russ emerged, eager to heap vengeance upon the Sons of Horus for their part in the Wolf Cull on Yaren III. The Primarch of the Space Wolves and his Tartaros armored Hearth Guard hurtled towards the ranks of sea green legionaries. Yet, at the last moment, the Sons of Horrors withdrew, their bolters hammering into the ranks of the Space Wolf Terminators as the gap left in the traitor lines was filled by the stalwart advance of the Death Guard. As the traitor forces hurled bolter fire, chem munitions, and the barrage of ordnance at the Falca Fenrica, the first Primarch and his inner circle knights brought their swords to the War Master's Gene Sons. Cutting deep into the center of the traitor lines, the Dark Angels made good their oaths of vengeance and censure. The presence of two loyalist Primarchs, fighting only paces apart, was enough to shake the resolve of even the fatalistic Death Guard. None dared approach, for to do so was to meet certain death. Yet to withdraw would only invite chase from the Wolf King, becoming prey for the most feared of predators. Castellan Praetor Vroghorn, master of the barbarous garrison, knew that such hesitation could cost the traitors their opportunity to retaliate should it be allowed to fester too long. Taking up his relic war axe, the Death Guard Castellan broke ranks and charged the Space Wolves Primarch. Their moment of indecision broken, the defenders' lines surged toward the Loyalists, enveloping Russ. The Death Guard's charge was not without some success. They cut down the last of the Tartaros Terminators who accompanied Lehman, leaving him to stand alone on the battlefield, at least for the moment. As the ponderous Terminators made their retreat, two among their number dragged a bloody figure through the mud. Castellan Praetor Vroghorn lived, but only just. Grievously wounded, the Death Guard commander clung to life with the grim tenacity of his legion. Agents of the Lion's final sanction against the Death Guard homeworld, the Interrompters of the Dark Angels Dreadwing, were deployed to every war zone on Barbarus. Upon the plains of Othria, a squad of these grim annihilators was dispatched to render the traitor forces to naught but ash and dust. As they advanced into the enemy lines, they were met by the dour Iron Warriors holding ground before the Bastion's Void Shield generator. The whole of the Horus Heresy played out in that moment amongst a hell of superheated plasma gas and the cracking boom of the Iron Warriors' shrapnel shells. The warriors of what had once been brother legions cut each other down. The badly wounded Death Guard Praetor made his way through the Bastion's underground network of tunnels, past defensive redoubts, and through choke points until he arrived at the munitions control node. He had been dragged to the Bastion gates by the remaining members of his Cataphracti retinue before they turned and met the vicious charge of Leman Russ. They had brought Vroghorn the time he needed to arm the grim payload that awaited the Loyalists. The brother Primarchs pushed on towards the Othrian Bastion, the way of their advance cleared by Arcus warheads, storm cannon shells, and searing las, neutron and volkite beams. As they approached the entrenchments before the Bastion gates, a rumbling tremor shook the battlefield. A moment later, the muddy earth erupted upwards in a series of massive explosions. In a final act of spite, the Death Guard Praetor had detonated the chemical payload housed within the depths of the Bastion. Caustic fire and choking chem smoke belched thickly from craters across the Loyalist lines, momentarily throwing warriors from the three attacking legions into disarray. Yet the Lion and the Wolf King could taste victory and would not let it slip from their grasp. With sharp commands, the Primarchs drove their legions onward towards the enemy fortification. In their wake, they left only devastation. The Dark Angels and Raven Guard armor picking off the remaining stragglers of the traitor forces. With their leadership broken and their traps sprung to little effect, the traitors' defense of Barbaros was collapsing. Dour iron warriors held the void shield generator that protected the bastion from orbital bombardment, as well as the bastion gates, but their numbers were dwindling, and they were surrounded by enemy units from all three of the attacking loyalist legions. Those defending the gates made vain attempts to hold back the combined assault of Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ, but even with the injuries the Primarchs had received, the Iron Warriors were cut down in mere moments by the angry demigods. With the defenders' desperate sortie smashed aside, the Loyalists had claimed victory over the plains of Orthria and stood ready to breach the bastion. Like Fulgrim's homeworld of Chemos, Barbaros was doomed to fall at the passage of the Angels. The fury brought to Mortarion's foster world was beyond the defenders' capacity to withstand. With bastions and subterranean bunkers breached across the planet, Loyalist strike teams purged the vaults housing the Death Guard's remaining chem arsenal before collapsing the fortifications with graviton bombs and seismic charges. When the last of the Loyalist forces had returned to their orbiting void ships, the orbital bombardment began. A vast storm of planet-killing munitions hailed down from the Dark Angel's fleet, splitting the poisoned world asunder. As the conflict on Barbaros came to a close, the Primarchs looked to their next targets. The Lion and Leman Russ parted ways, carrying on their campaigns of vengeance against the traitors as they each saw fit. Russ's remnant fleet struck out to bring the Emperor's executioners to traitor forces located close to the galactic core. The Lion's main force made its way toward the Spinward West, smaller Dark Angel splinter fleets enacting their Primarch censure throughout the region. In their wake, the shattered remains of fallen Barbaros hung in the void, silent as the grave. The destruction of Nuceria in 13M31. During the siege of Terra, Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion, received a shared vision with his traitor brother Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, of the extermination of Nuceria, Angron's hated homeworld. Its already shattered and depopulated remains were utterly destroyed and wiped from existence by an orbital bombardment commanded by the fleet of Lionel Johnson and his vengeful Dark Angels. The news of Nuceria's destruction renewed the hope of the besieged Loyalists, as this meant that the forces of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines were finally en route to reinforce the besieged throne world. The Age of Warding, from M31 to M34. The Great Scouring, in circa 14 M31. With the Emperor grievously wounded by Horus and confined to his golden throne, the armies of the Imperium strike back against the reeling traitors after the siege of Terra. The Dark Angel's Legion plays a significant role in these campaigns of vengeance, and is integral in driving out the forces of chaos from multiple systems and forcing them to retreat into the Eye of Terra. The Fall of Caliban, circa 14M31. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the surviving Loyalists rallied the reeling Imperium. The Dark Angels took a significant part in these battles, which later came to be called the Great Scouring. As they pursued the rebels, the First Legion diverted to nearby Caliban, which had been enshrouded by warp storms since Horus's betrayal. For Lionel Johnson, one final act of treachery remained to be discovered. Upon the Dark Angels' arrival in orbit, they were fired upon from the surface, pulling back the Legion fleet, L. Johnson tried to find out what had happened and discovered that Luther, who had become embittered by what he perceived as L. Johnson always taking all the glory, had poisoned the minds of the Dark Angels garrison and the new recruits that had been left on the planet against their Primarch. Correctly believing that Luther and the planet-side Dark Angels had actually been tainted by chaos, an infuriated Johnson ordered that Caliban be bombarded from orbit, destroying the planet's defenses. He then led his forces to the surface and assaulted the Order's fortress monastery, where he confronted Luther in single combat. Luther, transformed into a Chaos champion by the power of the Chaos gods, was now evenly matched in strength with the enraged Primarch. The battle between the two leveled the Order's fortress monastery as the planet was coming apart around them, the orbital bombardment taking a heavy toll on the surface. L. Johnson managed to wound Luther, but could not bring himself to kill the man who had been his brother and mentor. Luther lashed out with a powerful, sorcerous attack that mortally wounded him. As he saw what he had done, Luther felt a veil lift from his eyes, and the Chaos gods, seeing that once again their chosen champion had failed to defeat the lackeys of the Emperor of Mankind, lashed out with the powers of the warp. The fallen angels were scattered throughout space and time, and Caliban tore itself apart under the strain of the ruinous powers' assault. The only portion of the planet remaining intact was the rock on which stood the fortress monastery in which Luther and the Lion had dueled. The Dark Angels entered the shattered monastery and captured the broken Luther. Of L. Johnson himself, however, there was no sign. It was believed that Johnson was thrown into the maelstrom of space and time by the Chaos gods, along with the Fallen. The truth was that the Lion still lived, though he had been placed into a coma and had re-emerged into real space with the aid of the Watchers in the Dark, in a secret chamber deep beneath the fortress monastery which even his brethren did not know existed. Only the Emperor of Mankind, sitting silent on the golden throne from which he sees all, and the Watchers themselves, know this greatest secret of the Dark Angels. Even the Supreme Grand Master of the chapter is not privy to this truth. However, legend soon spread throughout the chapter that the Lion would find his way back to the Angels on that grim day when they went to war in defense of the Imperium for the final time. A fell legacy in circa 14M31. Still reeling from treachery and the loss of their Primarch and beset by warp storms, the Dark Angels are rocked to their foundations by the discovery that the destruction of Caliban had not killed all their brothers corrupted by Luther. Energy signatures obtained by the Legion's librarians briefly register the scattered presence of many traitors believed to have been slain, although these leads soon fade. It is unknown how many recruits Luther had on Caliban, and how many of those survived is a question that will haunt the Dark Angels for millennia to come. A Legion no more in M31. The Dark Angels accept, for the most part, the strictures of the Codex Astartes, splitting what remains of their legion into separate chapters of 1,000 Astartes each. These successor chapters become collectively known as the Unforgiven. The Surge for Recruiting Worlds in 120 M31. Necessity demands that the Dark Angels find a new recruiting world after the destruction of Caliban, but at this date, a conscious decision is made instead by the chapter to establish many. This plan is agreed to by the High Lords of Terra as it allows for contingencies and preserves the chapter's genetic diversity. For the Dark Angels, it allows the preservation of a mantle of secrecy, for no one is entirely sure of the number of the chapter's recruiting worlds or of how many aspirants are taken into the Rock. Using the confusion of the times to their advantage, the Dark Angels and their successors choose numerous planets, obfuscating their precise number and nature, even from the Imperial authorities. The Forgotten Wars, from 580 M31 to 632 M32. During an unspoken period of their history, referred to as the Forgotten Wars, rumors lead the Dark Angels, along with 3 of their successor chapters, the Angels of Vengeance, the Angels of Redemption, and the Lion's Sable, to embark upon a harrowing campaign to track down multiple fallen. The clues lead them through the Segmentum Obscurus, deep into the Gothic sector, and eventually into the Eye of Terror itself. In hindsight, it is easy to see that the Runer's powers baited them. Only the Dark Angels' irrepressible resolve allows them to escape, and they pay a high price in casualties. The Lion's Sable are completely annihilated. To cover up their immediate losses after their warriors were thought lost to the warp, the resources of the recruiting world of the Lion's Sable, the Ebon Orb of Nachwald, were usurped to replenish the Angels of Vengeance and the Angels of Retribution. The Dark Angels staged a false plasma explosion aboard the Rock to explain their loss of records, but it was decided by the Inner Circle to destroy all records relating to the event. Of the Forgotten Wars, the Dark Angels do not speak, nor has it entered into the apocryphal tales told to their initiates. They have gone to great lengths to ensure all references to that campaign or to the Lion's Sable have been stricken from the records available to the Adeptus Terra. Deep in the dungeons of the Rock are secreted the only remaining accounts, and only those of the Inner Circle ever learn of that heroic sacrifice that must forever go untold. Missing Foundings in circa M33. There are many Space Marine chapter foundings during this era, but the High Lords of Terra purposefully do not seek to use the gene seed of the Dark Angels chapter for any of them. The Apocrypha of Davio lists the following as second founding chapters derived from the Dark Angels: the Angels of Absolution, the Angels of Redemption, and the Angels of Vengeance. By this time, the name Lion's Sable has already been lost. The Second Mortis Gate Campaign, 560 M33. The entire Dark Angels chapter takes up arms against the renegade forces of the Death Guard. 3 solar months of storm-racked warfare see the traitor forces driven from their strongholds, and the Dark Angels' standards raised in victory. The Red Stars Campaign, in 732 M33 to 822 M33. In a series of wars known as the Red Stars Campaign, the mineral-rich Kolgotha system is scoured of Xenos and claimed by the Imperium of Man. The Dark Angels take part in many of these battles, including deploying in full chapter strength at the climactic Battle of Vermilac Prime. In desperation to cut the head off a rising Orc Warg, the entire Dark Angels chapter was deployed en masse. It was their hope that the Death Wing could draw out and destroy the Orc warboss Zogax the Great before the Space Marines were overwhelmed by the Green Tide. Alas, these hopes were dashed when Zogax's mechs deployed some sort of jamming device that prevented the Death Wing from teleporting down anywhere near the warboss's vicinity. Defiant, Supreme Grandmaster Alakon led his own command squad and the 3rd Company in an attempt to cut through the heavily armored bodyguard of Warboss Zogax. However, Aided by all manner of hulking mechanized fighting machines, the orcs proved too powerful. The Dark Angel's impetus was all but spent by the time Alakon appeared before the chain axe-wielding orc warboss. Tragically, the Supreme Grand Master was cut down, but as Zogax reached down to claim the lion's helm for his own, his hand was vaporized by a bolt of plasma. Howling in anger and surprise, the towering orc warboss looked up just in time to take a rapid volley of bolt pistol shots through both his good eye and his bionically enhanced one. Even devoid of the back part of his huge cranium and the majority of his brains, he fought on for a few more moments before he fell, twitching. Only the timely intervention of the notorious Fallen known as Cypher prevents the orcs from looting the lion helm and the Sword of Secrets from the slain body of the fallen Supreme Grand Master Alakon. When the Deathwing were finally able to teleport to the surface of the planet to secure victory of Cypher, no further signs could be found. The Red Wings of Redemption, M33. Aided by the vast armories of the Rock, the Angels of Redemption restructure and re-equip their first and second companies, the Red Wings, in emulation of the Dark Angels' Deathwing and Ravenwing companies. The other Unforgiven successor chapters soon follow suit. Increasing Observation in M34. As the Imperium tightens its controls following the Great Scouring and the ensuing consolidation of power, the Dark Angels and their successor chapters find themselves under increasing scrutiny. Only their flawless battle record and eagerness to persecute the Imperium's enemies allow them to avoid censure. Noble Passing in 101 M34. While leading his chapter to victory in the Bloodpox campaign against the Death Guard Traitor Legion and the Brotherhood of the Plague, the 12th Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels chapter, the esteemed Armoros, contracts the loathsome pox known as Nurgle's Rot. His rapid deformation convinces the Supreme Grand Master to immediately pass the Lion Helm to successor. To ensure the infection does not spread, he voluntarily enters the Rock's reactor chamber and is wholly consumed. In the Wrong Hands, in 456 M34, Inquisitor Halleck, after many decades tracking degenerates in wilderness space, captures a mysterious heretic known only as the Angel of Truth. The last Vox broadcast by Halleck's ship claims the prisoner has broken under questioning and revealed a deep-rooted heresy. While returning to Terra with his revelations, the Inquisitor is beset by an unknown enemy. The only Imperial force in the vicinity is the Dark Angel strike cruiser Black Sword of Vengeance. They report no sign of the Inquisitor, his vessel, or the prisoner. The Age of Execration, from M37 to M39. The Black Gulf Mines, in 154 M37. The few survivors of the Zargosan smuggler fleet break under pressure from a Dark Angel's force led by Master Interrogator Chaplain Molochia. They relate a tale of how a cloaked stranger fought his way aboard their flagship, the Black Needle, claiming parley. He knew the smuggler's code and invoked the rites of combat, winning his duel and taking the place of a seasoned mate. Within a year, the stranger had risen to the very top, besting the previous captain in single combat. Under his leadership, the Zargosian fleet, 5 ships in all, concentrated their raids along the Black Gulf mines. There, amidst the sprawling asteroid fields and orbital man-made platforms, the smugglers raided mining complex after mining complex, hauling off many tanker ships filled with sought-after minerals and gases. As it turns out, the leader of the mining colony, known as the Black Gulf Tyrant, is a figure greatly sought after by the Dark Angels. The battle for Khorne's Acropolis in 551 M37. Situated dangerously close to the Eye of Terror, the world of Pasembi II suffered a ferocious assault by the High Anarchist Podchek, a vile Chaos Magister whose forces of chaos left that world's planetary defense force reeling. Within a week, Podchek's legions swept away all organized resistance, and what few Imperial forces remained were driven back to Khorne's Acropolis, the site of an ancient structure raised to the glory of the Emperor during the Great Crusade. Fortunately, their salvation came in the form of the Dark Angels' Third Company, and few battle honors evoke more hard-won pride than the lone ribbon that commemorates this campaign. The Astartes of the Third Company made a daring drop-pod assault at Pasembi II and created a thin cordon between the Acropolis and the approaching horde of demons and chaos cultists. Master Baradiel, standing shoulder to shoulder with his command squad, orchestrated a defense that stopped the chaos forces dead. Once reinforced by the company's war machines, the Dark Angels advanced upon the enemy. Eventually, Baradiel came upon the anarchist and blew Podchek's head away from his body with his storm bolter. The archenemy's army fractured, and the demons fled back into the Imperium. As the mortal soldiers turned to flee the Astartes' wrath, the Dark Angels fell upon them. None escaped their righteous fury. The Battle of Midpoint in 871 M37. An Eldari fleet threatens to destroy the massive space docks of Midpoint in the Argonne sector. The sudden appearance of the Rock and the Dark Angel's sword fleet tips the battle in the Imperium's favor. The Eldari retreat, but not before the firepower of the Rock annihilates their capital ship and a half-dozen vessels of their armada. To this day, the savaged hulls and floating corpses of both sides still hang in the depths of space, forming an eternal graveyard. The Betrayal at Zambique in 883 M37. The Raven Wing follows a trail that leads all the way to the Imperial Governor of Zambique, a key Imperial planet sometimes called the Gateway to the Gothic sector. Before they can apprehend the Governor for questioning, however, the planet declares open rebellion against the Imperium and secedes from the Emperor's realm. The Dark Angels' task force is surrounded upon Zambique by heretic Astartes of the Alpha Legion, and only the timely counterstrike by half of the Death Wing prevents the annihilation of the entire Second Company. The Governor, a fallen angel who was once known as Brother Solus, escapes with the remnants of his traitor Marine allies. The Hunt for Solus in 987 M37. After picking up the trail of the fallen angel Brother Solus, the entire Raven Wing deploys en masse on the plains of Psykers, an agri-world in the Aura sub-sector. All 10 of the Raven Wing's death shrouds join the hunt, bringing a shroud of arcane darkness to that world's sun-drenched surface that can be seen from orbit. Despite their sweeping efforts, Brother Solus evades his pursuers again, and the chapter records state that Cypher himself may have had a hand in Solus's uncanny escape. The Amalgamation Schism in M38. The arrival of the Space Hulk Amalgamation triggers a series of events that sees the Crimson Sabers chapter estranged from the Imperium. A conflict with the Dark Angels over an interrogator chaplain's unorthodox excruciation of a prisoner is thought to be at the heart of the matter. The Great Crusade, from 299 M38 to 309 M38. The Dark Angels played a crucial part in the Great Crusade, a decade-long campaign that ended on the colony world of Altid 156. The Angels committed an assault upon the colony world of Altid 156 after it had rejected the rule of Terra solar decades before and declared independence from the Imperium. Although the Crusade's ruling council ordered a single regiment of Imperial Guard to assault the wayward colonists, the Dark Angels, acting on information they refused to disclose to the council, insisted on making the assault themselves. The Angels' Crusade force was composed of 3 Ravenwing squads, 5 Deathwing Terminator squads, and 5 tactical squads of the 5th Company, along with various support vehicles. Assaulting the Pilgrim colonists' headquarters, the Deathwing met the foe they had really come to fight. Not the separatist colonists, but their leader, Elucidax, the Keeper, a heretic known to have inspired dozens of rebellions across the quadrant. But Elucidax was known by the Dark Angels by another name, Zariah, the one-time captain of the Dark Angels Legion's 14th Assault Company. Though Zariah was a formidable opponent, killing a dozen Dark Angels, the Ravenwing captured him and transported him back to the Rock. Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai extracted a confession from the fallen Dark Angel, leading to the eventual capture of Zariah's entire band. Zariah refused to admit his sin in joining Luther in rebellion against the Dark Angels Legion, and languishes alone in a cell to this day. Though their actions on Altid 156 had not been coordinated with the rest of the forces of the Imperium engaged in the Crusade so that they could capture the fallen angel, the Dark Angels claimed that Elucidax, the Keeper, had been slain at their hands. This ensured that despite the breach in protocol, no inquiries by other Imperial authorities would be made. The Blackest Time, from 666 to 686 M38. 3 Grand Masters of the Ravenwing are lost in a single year in 666 M38, each one slain while in pursuit of a group of fallen Dark Angels. This marks the beginning of an unprecedented 2-decade period where the Ravenwing has no Grand Master. During this time, the Ravenwing are given direct orders from the Grand Master of the 2nd Company of the Angels of Vengeance, as the Dark Angels wait until a suitable candidate can be found from within their own ranks. The 100-Planet Rebellion in 518 M39. While attempting to follow Cyper's path, the Dark Angels uncover a mad priest named Aldrich the Subverter. The heretic visionary had led a swath of planets on the borders of the Veiled region to reject the rule of the Imperium. Within a solar decade, the Dark Angels and several of their successor chapters suppress the Chaos Cultist uprisings and slay their leaders. Such actions are doubly pleasing for Cypher, for not only is he revenged upon the Alpha Legion's machinations, but he further frustrates the Dark Angels. For their part in the campaign, the Angels are awarded many honor badges and campaign ribbons for their actions by the High Lords of Terra. The austere Angels infrequently bear such commendations, but feel pressure to do so in this case. Deep down, the inner circles seethe at the dishonor, for they know the truth, that the badges are but a sign of their failure to capture Cypher once again. The Relief of Rael's World in 814 M39. The penal facility on Rael's world is the target of a concentrated assault by a coalition of Alpha Legion warbands. Many among Segmentum High Command are unwilling to expand some of the overstretched resources in its relief. Then, with no warning or explanation, a Dark Angel's strike force intervenes. The enemy is routed and their leader captured by them. The deliverance of Rael's world seemingly a byproduct of the chapter's ongoing hunt for the Fallen. The Forlex Rescue in M39. A Necron stasis crypt awakens beneath the Imperial colony of Forlex. Striking from orbit, the Guardians of the Covenant drive the Xenos back below ground and, though the cost in lives is steep, well over 100,000 colonists are safely evacuated. The Battle of Styx in M39. Tau forces attempt to annex the Dark Angel's recruiting world of Styx. The rock itself arrives in orbit to defend the planet, and the Dark Angel's response is so violent that the Xenos are wiped out in a single solar day. The Lost Hope of Perdition in 891 M39. An investigation by the Dark Angels of a space hulk designated the Lost Hope of Perdition, newly materialized out of the warp, discovers strong elements of the renegades known as the Cleaved to be aboard. The ensuing fight is won when Dark Angel's assault squads, advancing behind a trio of Dreadnoughts, get close enough to set cyclonic charges in the Hulk's engine rooms, though at a cost of Supreme Grand Master Zakharon, who manually triggers the blast. The Age of Anathema. From M40 to M41. Starting with the destruction of Grimm's Landing in 550 M40. One of the first and most reliable of the Dark Angel's recruiting worlds, Grimm's Landing, is destroyed in an uprising, instigated by the Alpha Legion and supported by elements of the Night Lords. The Angels of Vengeance respond, fighting through wave after wave of renegades, cultists, and madmen. Finally, despite massive casualties, they exterminate every living thing on the surface of Grimm's Landing. Kegorak's Dew in M40. The Dark Angels track the Fallen known as Nejik to the world of Vrydos. They run their quarry to ground just as he is about to escape through a webway portal. However, the Dark Angel's efforts at capture are foiled when a sizable band of Harlequins burst from the portal. Fighting furiously, the Harlequins hold the wrathful Space Marines at bay long enough to snatch Nejik and drag him into the labyrinth dimension. The Macarian Heresy in 405 M41. Over 3 standard decades, the Dark Angels are one of the Space Marine chapters tasked with suppressing the civil wars collectively known as the Macarian Heresy, that are ongoing across many of the territories gained by the Imperium during the Macarian Crusade of the Lord Solar Macarius. The Ravenwing uncovers several corrupt cults, largely instigated by the Alpha Legion, and the unmistakable signs of Cypher's presence. The Deathwing are deployed in response, and several of the Fallen are captured amid the ensuing carnage. The rebellion populaces, regarded as mere obstacles to the Dark Angel's true mission, are slaughtered in their millions. During the Lythanos uprisings, only a run-in with the Space Wolves allows several of the Fallen to escape the Dark Angel's grasp. The Fourth Quadrant Rebellion from 775 to 780 M41. The Dark Angels were one of a dozen Space Marine chapters that took part in the suppression of multiple revolts and secessionist outbreaks, which set ablaze nearly a full quarter of the Segmentum Solar and outlying star systems, which was known as the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion. These brush-fire conflicts proved difficult to stamp out, not least because there was no single enemy or common cause behind them, but rather countless long-standing grudges and the fruits of many centuries of misrule and savage oppression by a series of corrupt imperial planetary governors. These civil conflicts were quickly made all the worse by the opportunist attacks of Chaos cults, renegades and Xenos forces taking advantage of the widespread anarchy the rebellion engendered. Mystery shrouds the architects of this catastrophe, but the Dark Angels fight alongside the Imperial Fists to end the threat once and for all. The Hegemonon Revolt. More than a dozen Space Marine chapters were caught up in the fighting of the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion, either aiding one faction or another, or simply defending their own territories, whilst others were brought in by the Imperium to pacify the Quadrant and finally put an end to the fighting. The Dark Angels were deployed to the world of Hegemonon during the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion to put down the rebel forces present on that planet. Rastabal, assault on the fortress of Caligar. Grandmaster Samael, a senior member of the Inner Circle, led his first action as the Grand Master of the Raven Wing in the initial invasion of the world of Rastabal during the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion. He followed up this action by his assault upon the fortress of the Pretender, Caligar, whom it transpired was one of the Fallen, and Samael personally ran the ancient traitor to ground after fighting him in a titanic duel said to have lasted a full day and a night. The Siege of Vrax in 821 M41. Supreme Grand Master Azrael leads nearly half of the Dark Angels chapter during the infamous Siege of Vrax. The Dark Angels force arrived on board the battle barge Angel of Retribution and the strike cruisers Sword of Caliban and Salvation, and a small number of escorts to assist against the forces of chaos that assailed the small imperial planet. Without communicating his intentions, Azrael simply set about his self-assigned mission, the destruction of Vrax's starport, which would sever any easy access to off-planet reinforcements. Needing no assistance, he saw no reason to involve the Imperial Guard regiments engaged on Vrax. Moving in a lightning assault, the Dark Angels' vanguard was led by Azrael himself. As the Angels' strike force moved through the starport, they unleashed unrestrained destruction upon it. The Dark Angels fought for Vrax's starport for 8 days before Azrael ordered the final assault. Leading elements of the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 9th companies, the Supreme Grandmaster led his Dark Angels to finish the enemy's resistance and finally overrun the starport. Dismounting his land raider, Azrael led the assault as he plunged into the enemy ranks of militiamen, his black blade, the Sword of Secrets, cutting a bloody swath. As the Dark Angels were about to achieve victory, the duplicitous Alpha Legion sprung their trap. The Chaos Space Marines had been lying in wait, using the militia as bait to draw the Angels on. As the fighting intensified, Azrael saw Brother Anmael fall, riddled with fire, and the sacred standard he was brandishing toppled. He knew he must recover the banner, for it could not be allowed to lie in the dust. Racing through enemy fire, he reached the banner just as the enemy did. The Dark Angels and Alpha Legionaries fought over the fallen body of Brother Anmail, neither giving ground. While the other Dark Angels fought to escape the Alpha Legion's sudden ambush, Azrael cut down the last of his enemies and plucked up the sacred standard. As he did so, a massive, armored figure strode through the smoke, his ancient power armor decorated with blasphemous runes and the heretical 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided. An assault marine launched himself into the path of this figure, the Chaos Lord, Arcos the Faithless of the Alpha Legion, only to be cut clean in half by the stroke of the Chaos Lord's warp-powered blade. The two mighty heroes clashed. Azrael was confronted by Arcos, and soon the two were engaged in furious combat. In one hand, Azrael held his chapter's sacred standard of devastation, in the other, the Sword of Secrets. The two rained down, smashing blows upon each other's armor, until blood seeped through the joints of Azrael's suit of artificer plate. The weight of Arcos's mighty blows had badly wounded the Supreme Grand Master in the one-sided duel. The Chaos Lord had the combined power of the 4 Chaos Gods with him this day. Arcos's blows forced Azrael ever backwards, weakening his opponent until a shoulder charge and a fast, low-sweeping cut sent Azrael sprawling to the ground, the Sword of Secrets skittering from his grasp. Prone amongst the rubble, the banner still clutched to him. Azrael saw death approaching as Arcos loomed over him, raising his dark blade for the killing blow. As he reached out to strike the blow that would see Azrael's reign as Supreme Grand Master end, the impacts of an assault cannon sent Arcos staggering backwards. Racing up the street came Deathwing Terminators, led by Interrogator Chaplain Belphegor, who, enclosed in his black Terminator armor, charged into Arcos, his Crozius Arcanium swinging. Belphegor managed to strike the traitor to the ground with a blow that cracked his power armor. Arcos fell dazed and bleeding. Concerned for his wounded commander, the chaplain turned to aid him. When he turned back to face Arcos, the traitor had vanished. Though the ambush had inflicted painful losses upon the Dark Angels, the traitors were unable to carry the day, and soon drifted away as they had been recalled by their thwarted commander. The Dark Angels proceeded to hunt down and destroy the remnants of surviving militiamen. Their ambush had inflicted painful losses on the Angels, with the loss of 200 battle brothers, but the traitors could not win this battle alone. The Dark Angels had failed to take a single traitor legionary alive, although their battle barge's cells did contain many captured renegade militiamen who would face the formidable interrogator chaplains on return to the Rock. After 10 days, the starport was securely in the hands of the Angels. They set about destroying the facility with demolition charges. 2 days later, the starport was damaged beyond repair. Upon completing their mission, the strike force departed Vrax Prime. The Massacre on Minoria in 832 M41. En route to the orc-infested war zones of Periliac Prime, the entire First Company of the Dark Angels, the elite Deathwing, make an unscheduled detour to the small and unremarkable mining world of Minoria on the edges of the Periliac system. The Deathwing teleport en masse onto the planet and kill or capture every one of its inhabitants. As a direct result of their delay in reinforcing the beleaguered planet of Periliac Prime, the entire system buckles and falls under the crushing might of Warg Driller Killer. It is later claimed publicly by several other Space Marine chapters that the Dark Angels' delay was a significant reason for the fall of the planet to the Greenskins. The Phase 5 Uprising in 897 M41. An Imperial expedition was launched into a region of space that had for many years been riven with fierce warp storms. Led by a rogue trader of Clan Arcadius, the Dark Angels provided their 5th Company to aid the endeavor. Entering orbit above Phase 5, the fleet was immediately fired upon by fearsome energy weapons of a type unknown to the fleet's tech priests. In response, the Dark Angels committed themselves to an immediate combat drop. The 5th Company engaged men altered by cybernetics and held entirely in the thrall of some blasphemous machine intelligence. In a grueling campaign that lasted 4 solar months, the techno-recidivists of Phase 5 were beaten back to their mighty silicon fortresses, besieged and eventually annihilated. The Dark Angels' last act was the destruction of the great logic stacks of the disabled machine entity, but this was not carried out until a party of tech marines, accompanied by the then Grand Master of the Death Wing, Beccanel, had entered the machine complex and retrieved some scrap of as yet undisclosed data. Even after the population of Phase 5 was freed from the artificial intelligence's control, they craved their machine ruler's mind touch and rejected their own freedom. The Dark Angels were forced to continue to press their attack. In a grueling campaign, the techno-recidivists of Phase 5 were eventually wiped from the face of their world. The assault on the toxic world of Sufflagam in 922 M41. The 3rd and 4th Companies of the Dark Angels pinned down a Chaos cultist army on the world of Sufflagam, while the Ravenwing deploys in a pincer formation. The Ravenwing's support squadrons clear streets, while the attack squadrons rush the rebel headquarters, summoning the Deathwing to teleport into the structure and eliminate the demon-possessed rebel leader. The death of Supreme Grand Master Naberius, 939 M41. Whilst pursuing Cypher, Commander Naberius, Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, is led into an ambush and slain by Chaos Space Marines. Azrael leads the Deathwing to recover his body, bringing an end to the shadow-shrouded conflict now known as the Ramiel Betrayal. For this and many other heroic deeds, he is subsequently named his successor as the new and current Supreme Grand Master of the chapter. Warg Groblinic in 949 M41. Fighting alongside the Imperial Guard troops of the Vostroyan Firstborn, Mordian Iron Guard and the Adeptus Mechanicus Scitari legions, the Dark Angels attempt to halt the onslaught of the Orc Warg Groblinic. The Orcs are checked at the Battle of the Solarian Gate, and Ezekiel, the Grand Master of Librarians, slew the Greenskin Warlord Groblinic. The Battle of the Solarian Gate. In the same year, during the Battle of the Solarian Gate, the Dark Angels' 5th Company deployed alongside the massed Astra Militarum regiments of the Vostroyan Firstborn, Mordian Iron Guard, and Adeptus Mechanicus Scitari legions in an effort to halt Warg Groblinic. Several minor worlds had already fallen, and dozens more teetered on the brink of destruction unless the Green Tide could be stopped. On the 4th day of the Battle of the Solarian Gate, Ezekiel, the Dark Angel's Grand Master of Librarians, was gravely wounded by a stray Orc bullet embedding itself in his left eye socket. Recovering the fallen librarian, he was taken to a makeshift triage station where the remains of his eye were removed. He only had the patience to be fitted for a simple bionic, returning to the fray. Rallying the 5th Company, he led a furious counterattack that broke Warg Groblonic forever. He faced the Orc warlord in furious hand-to-hand combat, slaying him with his powerful psychic assault. Hefting his mighty force weapon, he hacked off Groblonic's head and threw it into the Orc mob. The Warg broke at the sight of their fallen warlord, and the panicked greenskins were soon slaughtered by the Imperial forces. The Pandorax Campaign, from 959 to 961 M41. In the Demeter sector, Abaddon the Despoiler led an alliance of traitor legions, including his own Black Legion and the Death Guard, in an invasion of the Imperial Death World of Pythos in the Pandorax system, the location of an ancient hidden gateway to the warp. Another piece in his dark design to bring an end to the long war, the War Master of Chaos fell upon the world with a small force of demon engines and infernal war machines. In the space of a few bloody solar days, the major hive cities were overrun and the local planetary defense forces crushed beneath the might of the combined traitor legions. Only a small contingent of Katachan jungle fighters, the 183rd Katachan Regiment of the Imperial Guard, managed to escape the destruction, trekking through the world's inhospitable jungle to the relative safety of the nearest mountain range. Abaddon commenced the complex rituals and sacrifices that would open the Damnation Cache, a portal between real space and the warp, breaking open seals that had remained untouched since the time of the Horus Heresy. Heeding the impassioned cries for salvation from Pythos, the entire Dark Angels chapter, led by Azrael himself, came to the Defenders' aid. Supporting these Space Marines were Grey Knights dispatched from Titan to deal with the escalating demonic incursion and the dire peril that the Damnation Cache posed. Both Imperial forces smashed through the Traitor Legion blockade around Pythos in an epic void battle that pitted the finest warships of the Imperium, supported by the Rock, the Dark Angels' mobile fortress monastery, against the ancient vessels of the Traitor Legions. After the Chaos Warfleet was finally driven from orbit and back into the void, the Space Marines were able to send their troops down through the atmosphere, bringing war to its ruined hives and hostile jungles. Failing to allow this distraction to draw him away from the awakening of the Damnation Cache, Abaddon sent an alliance of legions to hold the Loyalists at bay. Before either the Dark Angels or the Grey Knights could stop him, he finally opened the portal to the warp, demons spilling out across Pythos. The ensuing conflict devastated the world as reality itself bent and buckled under the raw power of the Empyrean. The unleashed energies created rampant psychic phenomena, and Space Marines fought under boiling skies of blood and in roiling crowds of keening spirits. All across the Demeter sector, latent Psykers were awakened to full and terrible awareness. Rebellions sprung up like cancerous boils on dozens of Imperial worlds in the region. After a long and bitter struggle, a squad of Grey Knights managed to reach the Damnation Cache and close the war portal. Starved of their demonic allies, the traitor legions were forced onto the defensive, and finally into retreat. Abaddon's forces left Pythos, escaping the vengeance of the Imperium once again, but the world had been irrevocably tainted by the touch of the warp. Its once proud cities and vast wilds twisted into a nightmarish hellscape. Before the portal was closed, however, Abaddon took with him a Psyker, rumored to be of prodigious strength and the bearer of a unique gift that would aid him in his forthcoming 13th Black Crusade.